it'll be available to use to share with your team or to others who cannot attend today. So that will come out a bit later. So our agenda today covers 3 topics. One is to discuss the guidelines that were shared on Friday and then were released publicly yesterday. It's your opportunity to ask for the questions to the VIA Sport team about the guidelines and any outstanding issues. Many of you have already engaged with the VIA Sport team over the last number of weeks, and specifically with Jared and Heather, who have done outstanding work to reach out to you and support you in this process. And then also Heather will provide an outline of some additional opportunities for support and engagement as you finalize, communicate, and implement your return to sport plan. Jared will provide an update on VIA Sport's work on cross-sector engagement. And then finally, I'll provide a brief update on the Heritage Canada funding at the end of the call. So we have about an hour scheduled, and most of this time will be spent to really answer your questions. And again, if we don't know the answers, we'll find them and post them on our website. But before we get started, I do want to thank you all for your patience while we've navigated this process. It hasn't been easy. It's been challenging and, quite frankly, frustrating at times. So I do appreciate your patience and understanding as we've all kind of had to learn as we go. But throughout the process, we did commit to actively listening to your concerns, adjusting and learning as we went. Sharing what we know, and then to really foster, good conversations with you so we understand, what your issues are. I also know that sending out the guidelines on Friday at 5 o'clock wasn't ideal, but we had just gotten the green light from government and we wanted to get it out as soon as possible. So we had to balance that need for getting it out with the urgency for some people to receive it. So I know it wasn't ideal, but we did want to get it out so that you had some time. I'd also like to acknowledge many people who contributed to the work on this document. We've heard from over 100 different sport organizations over the last number of weeks. And particularly want to shout out a big thank you to the BCRPA, Sport BC, Sport Med BC, the Life Saving Society, the Recreation Facilities Association of BC, the MSO Leadership Council, WorkSafe BC, the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture, and of course external advisors. So lots of people contributed to this document, and we are very, very grateful for that participation. So now I'll pass the mic over to Heather, who will begin to lead the discussion around the guidelines. Over to you, Heather.
Thanks, Charlene, and thanks everyone for joining us. I know you've all been eagerly awaiting these guidelines, and hopefully there is not too many surprises in there from the information that we have already shared leading up to this point. There have been a few questions that have been pre-submitted, so I will start by addressing those questions, and then we can go to the chat and collect any other questions that are surfacing for you. I think the first one, I just want to start with a reminder on the next steps. So now that the sport-specific guidelines have been released, sport organizations can move ahead with finalizing and getting approval to move forward with resuming activities. But there is no formal activity or approval process required from government or VIA Sport. And that approval should come from internal within your own organization, so to be approved by your boards, and the same guidance should be provided to the clubs. So the key here is ensuring you have a safety plan or sport-specific guidelines in place in order to move forward. But now that the sector guidelines are out there, you can continue at your own pace based on the needs in your sport and your comfort of your organizations to move forward. Another question that came up is, what is recommended versus required from within the guidelines? So the majority of this document is a reference tool made up of best practices, key health information, and recommendations for sport organizations to make informed decisions. That said, the one key thing that is a must do is having a safety plan in place. So there is a PHO order out that all businesses, which should include sport organizations, must have a safety plan in place. We have provided a sample template within the appendices and in the guidelines. This template was modeled off of the WorkSafe BC template, but we sportified it a little bit. This template is not required for use, so if your organization has something that's going to work better for you or in your sport, then feel free to use your own formatting, but it is a guide if you or your clubs are looking for a resource to support that. I just also want to highlight that in addition to the sports sector guidelines that are released, the BC Parks and Recreation Association guidelines were also released last week. And one key point of reference is that they have a section within their guidelines on facility renters, and what they call out there is, again, in that idea that all people renting the facilities are also required to have a safety plan. So that's another key communication to the clubs. So not only, and it's just really pointing out the alignment across all of the different guidelines, is that piece around having the plan in place. There are some questions arising around the clarification related to community-focused activities. So the definition within the guidelines is around activities that are taking place within the home sport community or club where participants are members. This means avoiding cross-regional, interprovincial, or cross-country travel for sport. So I think from an individual perspective, if I live in Vancouver, but my sport activities are occurring in Burnaby, that's fine. But as individuals are still being advised to be cautious about expanding their social bubbles, that also should be applied to sport. So from a sport organization perspective, the sport activity chart outlines keeping those sport activities within the club environment right now and not crossing between clubs in games or different situations that will expose larger groups to each other. That leads me to the question around group size, and if you've had a chance to read through the guidelines, you'll see that on page 10, there's a reference related to space and the potential to kind of go above the 50 maximum group gatherings of 50 people, depending on the square footage or how large the space is and the ability to maintain physical distancing. So similar to grocery stores and recreation facilities are also following the guideline around this. And it's about a recommendation around square footage and the use of the 5 square meter rule for floor space per person. So where this might come into play in sport is, as an example, a venue where there may be multiple soccer fields in the same vicinity, or an indoor recreation center where there's a large square footage that allows multiple user groups to participate in the facility, but in separate spaces. So that said, the individual activities are still encouraging to remain in small groups. And the facilities themselves will determine their own maximum capacity of their facility. So while clubs may be able to have guidance around the maximum group size of their activity. They'll want to check with the facility to make sure that that will fit within their overall maximum capacity. There's some questions arising around the progression through the stages. So within the sport activity chart that's provided within the guidelines, there are kind of 3 phases outlined there. And those phases are aligned to the government phases. So as we know that we don't know timelines right now, and this will all be dependent on the risk of community transmission and how that's progressing in society and in our different communities across the province. So we will look to provide direction and guidance from the government as to how the government phases are progressing and the recommendation and how safe it will be to advance some of our sport activities through the different phases as well. I think those are the key questions that we've received beforehand. So I think there's a few in the chat. Jared, maybe you could read those out to me.
Oh, I only see one.
Oh, okay.
But it just came in, unless I'm seeing something different. But okay, the one that just came in, if the phases align, does that mean that phase 3, as noted in the guidelines, would start when the government moves to phase 3?
I believe that we kept numbers out of our phases to avoid confusion. So this first phase that we're entering, we combined a little bit of phase 2 and phase 3 because the phase 2 of the government plan was really only a kind of 2 to 3 week period, and we were still in the development of the guidelines. So it does encompass much of the government's phase 2 and 3 combined into one phase within the sport activity chart.
Heather, it's Annabelle from Rugby. I think that's creating some confusion. Legally, we all have to follow the provincial health officer's orders, and they are talking in terms of phase 3, and we're currently in phase 2. We're all desperate to get to phase 3. It would be quite useful if we understood exactly how these 4 levels on the sport activity chart directly connect to those phases.
Yeah, thank you. We can work with the government to clarify some of that and make it more obvious and call out the connection a little bit more between the phases.
So hi, Heather and Jared. I put the question in. So the reason I was asking is just because in the guidelines it says May to September, which is, as you said, it combines phase 2 and 3 together, which is fine. But if we have to align with this, if the government moves to phase 3 before this phase, the guidelines phase 3 starts, because September, say we move July 1st, are we in contravention of the sector guidelines?
No, the sector guidelines do state approximately. So the movement between the phases will be aligned with the government movement of their phases. So again, we could call out the language or write a sentence further to that below. So those timelines were approximate to align with the estimated timelines that government had put into their plan.
Heather, it's Jeremy from BC Hockey, and I appreciate all that. And the document looks great, you guys. Good job on this. It's not an easy task, so appreciate that. My question is still in around the last 2 columns of that chart. So progressively loosen and the new normal, and what the process looks like. So I know government will make those decisions that really define those columns, but sort of when and how does that happen? How are you notified? I think, a good clarity for us, just so, for example, you might email all PSOs every Monday to say no change. We've checked in, no change, no change. Or you might sort of give us a heads up. Something could be coming in the next couple of weeks. That would be probably the most helpful thing, because I do understand that those two columns will be a wait and see. But we're going to be constantly asked by our participants when. And if one sport can open before the other, then there's going to be sort of that conflict as well. Hey, how come soccer's going and hockey's still not going? That kind of thing. So I think it's probably the most important piece of the communication is any messaging coming from the government that we then sort of rebound back out to our members, so people feel like they're engaged and in the know as best as possible.
For sure, and we are in constant communication with the government, so hopefully we'll be provided with some of that insight, and we have intentions to continue our weekly email from Charlene to this group. So we'll note that in terms of putting in an update each week as to what information we have been provided and what insight we might have to that.
I can throw to a couple questions on the chart. So we have from Jennifer from BC Artistic Swimming. For daycares, they've revised the required 10 days isolation for individuals showing symptomatic to be able to be waived, provided the individual is tested for COVID-19 or cleared by a physician. Can we expect the same parameters for sport?
Yeah, I would like to send that back to through our channels just to validate that. But if the individual has been tested and cleared by a physician, then my assumption would be that they would be able to also participate in any of activities of their choice.
Gymnastics BC called them steps instead of phases, so there is no mix up with the government phases. So another tip. Will there be guidance for the competition as they get introduced in later phases, or is it for us to develop sport by sport?
Emma, maybe you could help clarify this a little. Do you mean guidance as to when it's okay to move to those competition phases, or are you looking for further like guideline type recommendations or best practices?
Yeah, I guess it was sort of it's less on the timing. I think we've discussed that, and more on like the processes, because you talk about regional gameplay and then larger scale events, and what does that mean in each of those phases, or what does that look like? Is it going to be up to each sport and their NSO to look at what makes sense, or is that something that we could expect to get additional guidance or guidelines from you guys on?
I think certainly if people are looking for that, that is a role that we can play, and that's something that we want to engage as well the other national partners. And I think that a lot of that work is occurring nationally. So we'll make sure we're connected and sharing that information. And if there is still some gaps, that is something that we can look to develop.
Is the participant agreement mandatory or just highly recommended?
The agreement that we provided within the guidelines, again, is a sample template that you can choose to utilize. It has been recommended from a liability perspective and a participant education perspective to have either waivers and or participant agreements in place. But again, that is the decision of the sport organization.
What's your definition of non-contact? Does that mean no infraction of the 2 meter physical distance?
Correct. So activities, yeah. So it is about the activity. So maintaining the distance as much as possible. So activities that are constantly putting individuals into close contact is not recommended. But anything that may have an occasional contact, it's hard to define occasional though. So as limited as possible.
Actually, Jason, we'll get to you right away. We're just finishing up with this last question in this topic. Can I get that in writing?
Yeah, we can look to further define how we've written that within the guidelines.
Great. Jason, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Just wanted to kind of echo Jeremy's comments around thanking you guys for the work here. I know it's not an easy task. We're all tasked with this difficult one here. So thank you for all the work you're doing. Also echo what Annabelle and Emma saying around added definitions on group sizes as they increase. What that could potentially look like would be helpful for us. And then, this is soccer, by the way. And then just so everyone's aware, to be open with everyone, I've shared with some of the groups that we communicate with, is that under the current terms, as far as the phase that we're in right now, is that soccer has shared it out with all of our members and all of the information on how groups can potentially get back onto the fields. And the earliest that activity could potentially happen for us, and we've got approval from our NSO to do this, is June the 12th. So I just want to make sure everyone is aware that there's a potential there, that there are going to be groups, soccer groups, potentially on the fields around mid-June. But ultimately, they have to complete the steps that we've outlined as far as an assessment tool and all that sort of stuff. So just wanted to make sure all the sports are aware.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks for that. Sorry, I got mixed up. How are other PSOs managing the safety plan if they use multiple venues for events, doing a separate safety plan for each venue? ? If you guys want to write in the chat box, I think there's been a couple answers to that. So, but every sport is going to have a different way of building out the safety plans at a club level, and the support that they will give, like from a PSO to the club. Yeah, it'll really depend on how much discrepancy there is from club to club and how much you can provide. But it's a good question. What are the penalties of breaching the non-contact definition with competitive boxing and commercial?
Yeah, so these guidelines are not regulation, they're recommendations. So therefore, the policing of a lot of this is not in place. Where there is some level of oversight is through WorkSafe BC and the PHO order to have a safety plan in place. So they have the ability to inspect organizations and their activities and make sure that a plan is there. So I can't speak to the frequency or the likelihood of the types of organizations that will occur with, but people should be prepared that is a possibility.
With regards to the exception to the limit of 50 people on page 10, did this come from PHO? We have a facility that was seeking an exception to the 50 because they have a large property, 80 plus acres, from Dr. Henry's office, and we're told no.
This language came directly from the grocery store guidelines that were approved, or I don't know if they have been reviewed by the Ministry of Health. same, the BCRPA guidelines and our guidelines have been reviewed at the government level, and there was no comment related to following those guidelines. But that said, at the local health, I don't know from a local health authority perspective if there could be additional guidelines or protocols that are in place at the local level. So depending on where that facility is in the province, there may be something additional that they are required to follow.
So just quickly on that, an example, Vancouver Coastal Health came out with a letter that said that that if you are able to physically distance in your space with over 50, that that you're allowed to do so. But that is a regional health authority that doesn't always have the same communication as the provincial body in health. So there is discrepancies in what we're hearing happening across the province, and it's making it complicated. So that's it. The answer is it's complicated. I apologize if this has been covered already, as I was late logging on, but is the definition of community or sport club games being slowly introduced, meaning games between two teams could take place in this stage?
Yeah, so we'd look to the sport-specific guidelines to define whether that's appropriate within your sport. So there are some activities or sports where that can take place within the club in a safe way. What it is not saying, it's not encouraging any games or play across different clubs. So league play is not encouraged, but potentially games between two teams within a club or two individuals playing tennis or things like that could be appropriate depending on your sport.
Sorry, I was answering.
I think Brian might have sent questions to me privately, so I'll look for those.
I just asked Brian to submit it to me too. So
okay.
One per. Oh, that's answering another question. Okay, so Brian asks, is there a centralized clearinghouse where clubs can go to get the correct and up-to-date info on the status of the facility they use?
Good question.
Jared, do you have any insight into that?
I haven't heard of anything. So, and I was going to be discussing a little bit about the connections to municipalities and facilities, but from what I've gathered in those conversations, I haven't seen anything that's coordinated in one spot about the status of facilities, and they're all going through similar to all the sports are going through different processes. So, but it's a good question, something that I can keep in the back of my mind. We need to know who leads the guidelines, PHO, LHA, or question marks. There is an appearance of multiple agencies, and at the local community level, there may be confusion.
Mm-hmm. It is complex, and so guidelines are set generally at a provincial level from a PHO, but the local health authority has the ability to apply additional standards based on what's happening within their region. So unfortunately, that means that there are multiple agencies that you have that depending on where you're located, that you'll need to stay connected with and up to date. And we will do our best to share the information that we have. But yeah, the local health authorities, the clubs or wherever you're operating will want to check in on any of those additional requirements.
This leads into the next one. I think I can answer. If the user has a plan and the facility has a plan, which plan is the priority? How would the plan be created without knowing the facility's plan? It's It's a good question. We need to, and that's what something that we recognized very early on is needing to build relationships with the other systems at play to bring back sports. So municipalities, facility operators, and then from there led to really great conversations and partnership development with organizations like RFABC, Recreation Facilities Association of BC. And so we have to marry all of these different plans. Facilities need to make sure that user groups are following the protocols that have been developed by PHO, and the user groups need to ensure that the facilities are providing or giving that space as well for the user groups to be safe. So there's no precedent of or hierarchy of it, that we have to marry the two, and so that really comes down to communication and then comfort levels on both sides. So it's not perfect, but that's the process. Any thought in the development of a resource that could assist with ensuring compliance? All associations or clubs report, wondering how we address compliance and what the metrics might be to do so.
Yeah, I'm just digesting the question.
Heather, it's Jeremy. I wrote it and I made some typos in there. So I can, and Jared did a great job of reading those typos perfectly. But I'll tell you what, I can clarify the question a little bit. So BC Hockey, for example, we will, your guidelines are out now. Hockey Canada will have some safety guidelines that come out likely this week, and our members will see all of that. BC Hockey will produce a bit of a supplement along with all of that. So our members will have a lot of material, which is great. And my question really is now about compliance and how we ensure that they're following all the resources that we've given them. And I'm curious from your end if there's thought on resources that you've thought to develop, or maybe we should look to develop that say, here's a template that Abbotsford Minor Hockey reports to BC Hockey every month on what was successful, what was challenging, or is there even items that they should be doing within their own association and players, parents, coaches, as far as ensuring that compliance is being that compliance is occurring at the local level. So the last thing we would want to do is do all this great work collectively, and then have the local level not, carry it out and get shut down anyway. So that's what I tried to type in 2 sentences, but needed explanation. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that could, when I get into some of the further opportunities for engagement, I'm going to speak to a way that we can share information and kind of create maybe some groups to develop some best practices or additional resources like that. And I know there is a few PSOs that have set up within their structure kind of the ability to sign off on club plans or have some connection there. But I think you're also speaking to, even once they have a safety plan in place, some of that ongoing support or connection that you want to have with your clubs. So for sure, that's a great topic that we can start to discuss through some of those channels.
I'm just gonna add one more point to this. That we'll ask one more question, then we'll get into the next part of the conversation. At Rugby, we're making all levels apply for sanctioning for any activity. They will be asked to provide proof of their risk assessment, safety plan, etc., which I think is fantastic. That's a great move. Not all sports will be able to have that ability or a governance structure with working with their clubs. So every sport's going to be a little bit different, but sharing this information, what we'll get into next, I think will be really key to come up with some of those plans, and for us to then learn and support and build out some of those templates or guidelines. Absolutely something we can do. I also add that in working with then other partners and supporting that compliance will be important as well. So our municipal partners and others. So it's a collective effort in working at that club level and really where sport happens. That's for sure. Last question: can local health authorities reduce the PHO directives?
I don't believe that they have the authority to reduce anything. It's to add in addition to the provincial health authority. I also had a question related to that about where would the local health authorities publish information. So if they do have additional orders or directives in place, it should be available on their website. So the VIA Sport website, as well as within the guidelines in the resource sections, have the linkages to each of those websites. And if we come across anything that we think it is like directly related to sport, that we will share that through our channels as well.
Great. Heather, let's go on to the next topic.
Yeah, so in addition to creating these guidelines, we've been developing a plan for how we can further engage and support within the sector in terms of the development of your plans, but also answering further questions and some of that ongoing work and sharing of best practices. So related specifically to the guidelines, in addition to this webinar today, we will be hosting a public webinar on Thursday at 1:30. That's open to local sport organizations, recreation leaders, facility operators, any interested community members. And that will be, in addition to speaking to the sport-specific guidelines, BCRPA will be on the line and available to speak to how the sport-specific and the recreation center guidelines complement each other. Jared and I are still also available here to review any plans that you have as you're working through it, to address any questions that you have. If we can't answer those questions, we are still the conduit to raise those questions with the ministry, and we have a process in place to do so. And as now they are had to work through a lot more questions, they're becoming more responsive and with answering them as well. And we will also continue to update the FAQ section on our website. So we will do that after the call today with all the questions that we addressed here. And every few days we'll continue to add to that as we are getting questions from the group. Other opportunities that we are upcoming, we are putting on a sports science, sport medicine panel hosted in partnership with Canadian Sport Institute Pacific and SportMed BC later next week. And we will look to send you those details as soon as possible, hopefully either later today or tomorrow, with the final date, time, and panel members, as well as ways to submit your questions. We are also exploring a paradisability sport discussion, and there's further complexities that exist based on the population of many of those individuals participating in those activities. So looking for some additional experts from the medical side to support the building of parasport related plans. We are also exploring, continually exploring the legal insurance risk aspect of this, and opportunities for guest speakers, panels, and other supports that we can provide in that area. So as any new information comes, we will share that with you. And then I spoke to this opportunity to connect again with your peers. So following the roundtable this survey told us there was some desire to continue to connect, share information, have those conversations across sports. So we have set up a platform on Slack, an open group with all of your organizations, as well as subgroups that are the same as those roundtable groups that you were part of. We will look to invite you over the next day to those groups, and it'll be opportunity to connect, share between yourselves, as well as pose questions either to Via Sport or to the individuals in the groups. We would love to be able to post a link to each of your sport-specific guidelines on our website to help, or a link to your website where you are posting your guidelines to help direct people that might be looking for sport-specific information back to your resources. So as those become available, please stay connected and share those links or that you'd like us to share on our website, and we will do so. Jared, I think that's the main points there. So maybe you can speak to some of the cross-sector engagement that we are also doing in support of this work.
Let's just quickly.
We'll have time for questions at the end, I think.
Okay. And so in terms of the cross-sector, early on, there was a few different groups that started reaching out, whether it be a facility and understanding what sport was going to look like, but also kind of outside of our funded organizations. So, requests from anything from shuffleboard to dance to more that are connected into pickleball, ball hockey associations. So we've been working with them and trying to align the overall sport, because they are really connected into the municipality and facilities. So I've been working quite closely with a group of municipalities so that they understand our plan, but we also understand what they're going through, and trying to make sure that one doesn't move faster than the other. So, if sport opens up and you have no facilities to play in, that's a problem. If facilities are open and we're saying, well, you can't go yet, that's also a problem. So really trying to align a lot of that work and coordinating with BCRPA, as Heather mentioned, to get this information out in a coordinated fashion on Thursday to a really broad-based group, and that's for anyone who's interested in the return to sport process. So that's one step. It is short notice, but we wanted to get the information out as soon as possible. But if there's appetite for more, we'll host more webinars for like that broader base group of in our communities. We also, and I've alluded to it, in terms of provincial organizations that are supporting this as well. Recreation Facilities Association of BC has been fantastic. I just heard that they have opened up their resources to non-members as well during this time. So that's a great opportunity for you to learn more about the return to sport, but also facility lens, and you can build in some of that into your plans if you haven't already done so. And so using them as a resource. They're more than willing to review anyone's plans. They reviewed our guidelines, but have said that they are more than willing to review any one of your plans in terms of that facility lens. So that's something that I think could be a great resource for you. Also, the Via Sport Regional Alliance, the Pacific Sports Centers, and some of the other facilities that make up the Regional Alliance. They're working to get this message out in communities and connecting with their municipalities. They have really strong connections with them, and so that when sport does come, that everyone is aware of the process, that they have the right information. And that is something that we think is key, is getting the right information into the hands of everyone, because there is a lot of misinformation out there, and no fault of anyone. We built processes quickly, and we're we had to shift with it. So the more that we can get the information out, the better. And so these groups have been really fantastic as part of that. Same thing with the Multisport, the Leadership Council. They have been a fantastic resource for us to continue to advise about the process, but also get our messaging out of what everyone's going through and supporting the provincial sport organizations. Another thing I wanted to flag and call out is starting to get more questions about school sport and what does that look like. So that's something on the docket on the horizon for us to start to think through. It is a different structure, but we know that in the fall they're going to need support, and that there's connections into your systems as well and your athletes and members. So it shows another need for alignment in the system, and something that we'll start investigating how to support. So wanted to flag that as well. Just overall, what I've seen in terms of engagement from facility owners, both private, public, and other groups that are interested in sports, is a real desire for collaboration and coordination. And so we've tried to pull them under the tent, and everyone's willing right now, and it's been that's been really fantastic. And so the more channels that we can get this information out, the better. So obviously one of our main channels is through you and the PSOs, but we hope to support you in getting that message out in different ways through these different collaborations as well. And the last thing I would say is, if there are groups or facilities or municipalities that you feel haven't got the information, because we haven't hit everyone, link us to them, and we can share, and we can do that work as well. So more than happy to be that connection.
Great. Wow. Well, thank you, Jared and Heather. Outstanding work, you two, in terms of understanding the issues and responding and trying to answer all of these questions. I don't know if there's any more in the chat here that we want to address.
Yeah, Charlene, I'm gonna circle back to one. And actually, you might even take this. We know there's no liability coverage for most PSOs, LSO related to contagion disease. We have also been advised that as a PSO, we have to be careful not to reach beyond our mandate. We have no authority or training to approve health and safety plans or enforce controls. Does taking on approving or enforcement not greatly increase our PSO liability?
Yeah, wow. The whole issue around liability is a tricky one, and that's certainly a topic that we want to bring forward in terms of our panel. So we want to bring forward some legal experts, some risk experts, insurance people, so that we can have a wholesome conversation on this. There's quite a diversity of opinion on this. I'm sure you've heard from various lawyers between different sport organizations. Some are risk adverse and others aren't. So I think it does depend on the structure of your organization, your bylaws, in terms of your ability to enforce, etc. But it is really our intention is to bring together some experts on this topic so that we can help you navigate this complex issue. So I don't have an answer, but I'm committed to trying to bring some experts together to help inform your decision making.
Another question, will there be an expanded guideline for contact sports? I feel there is still too much ambiguity and confusion.
Yeah, I think too, there's also a comment about being able to connect and share across the contact sports. So the Slack platform is one way that we can help to facilitate that, and there will be a contact specific sport group. So that will be a starting point, and then we can work to determine what additional resources might be required there.
Okay, any other questions?
That's all from the chat.
That's all from the chat. Okay, all right. Well, of course, if there's any additional questions, by all means, do reach out to Heather, Jared, or I, or anybody here at VIA Sport, and we'll do our best to answer them or find you an answer. And also watch, our weekly update on Fridays for information, new insight or anything else that might come our way. We have made a commitment to continue to do that, to send out an update each Friday. I know it's not best, but these days are blending into each other, but it seems that things happen on Friday and we want to get it out, so please watch for that. And also, I know many of you have asked about the funding from Heritage Canada. Via Sport has had many conversations with the ministry about that funding and when it might be coming. Currently, they are working with Sport Canada on that particular agreement, and as soon as we know more, we'll share it with you. In my view, this will happen in the coming weeks, but certainly not in the next week. I see this is going to take a few weeks to sort out. So just wanted to provide that context for you. I know many of you are doing some forecasting and budgeting and conversations with your board. So I don't see this coming immediately, but certainly by end of June or early July. So in summary, I do want to say, thank you again for joining this call, and thanks to the Via Sport team for an incredible amount of work. We are here to support you through this in whatever way we can. If there's a question that you need answered, reach out to us, and we'll do our best to answer that or to find you an answer. So we want to help you get through this. This is challenging times, but rest assured, we're here to help. So by all means, do reach out.
Actually, one last question: will Via Sport be issuing this heritage funding?
Yes, it is my understanding that the funding will come through Via Sport, but again, that hasn't been concluded, but that is my understanding.
That's everything from the chat.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And by again, do reach out. We don't want to lose connection with you. We want to see how you're making out, how sports are rolling out in the communities. So let us know if you're ready to send out your plans, how it's going, so that we can post it on our website or however we can support you in this process. So good luck, everybody, and stay in touch. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.